A shadow falls across the lands of Middle-earth. A darkness bleeding from the east. A creeping dread that seeps into the hearts of all free peoples. For the Dark Lord, Sauron, has risen again, his fortress of Barad-dûr rebuilt in the black land of Mordor, and his will, a fiery eye, searches tirelessly for the one weapon that can grant him dominion over all life. The age of the elves is fading, the strength of the dwarves wanes, and the kingdoms of men, once mighty, are fractured and weakened. Gondor in the south stands as a bulwark against the shadow, but its throne has been empty for 1,000 years, ruled by a line of stewards who watch and wait for a king who never returns. In the north, the kingdom of Arnor is a memory, a ruin haunted by fell spirits, its people scattered and forgotten. The line of its kings, the line of Isildur, who cut the One Ring from Sauron's very hand, is thought to have failed, a lineage lost to the winds of time. Yet, hope is not extinguished. It survives in secret, guarded by the silent watchers of the wilderness, a flicker in the growing gloom. For the blood of the ancient kings of the West endures, flowing in the veins of the Dúnedain, the rangers of the north, a grim and weather-beaten people who patrol the lonely lands, their endless, thankless vigil protecting the unsuspecting villages of the little folk from the encroaching evil. This is the story of the one who would rise from the ashes of his ancestors, a man born to a destiny of sorrow and glory, a man who would walk the paths of the dead to reclaim a living throne and challenge the very heart of the shadow. This is the entire history of Aragorn, son of Arathorn, the last chieftain of the Dúnedain, whom the world would come to know as Elessar, the Elfstone, the returned king of Gondor. Our story begins not in a grand palace, but in the secluded sanctuary of Imladris, the hidden valley of Rivendell, the last homely house east of the sea. Here, amongst the ageless elves, a young boy was raised, a mortal child in an immortal land. He was called Estel, which in the elven tongue means hope. His true name and lineage were a carefully guarded secret, for he was the heir to a perilous legacy. His father, Arathorn II, the 15th chieftain of the Dúnedain, had been slain by orcs while hunting, struck by an arrow that pierced his eye, when Estel was but a child of 2. His mother, the wise and foresighted Gilrain, fearing for her son's life, knew that the enemy's spies were searching for the last of Isildur's line. To protect him from the shadow that hunted his family, she forsook her own people and brought him to be fostered by Elrond half-elven, the wise and powerful master of Rivendell. For 2 decades, the truth of his heritage was a closed book. Elrond loved him as a son, and Estel grew swift and strong under his tutelage, his mind filled with the deep lore of the elves and the histories of the Edain, the fathers of men. He learned the skills of a warrior, the art of the sword and the bow, and the subtle craft of moving unseen through the wilderness. He was noble of spirit and keen of mind, yet a shadow of sorrow often touched his features, a sense of a destiny yet unrevealed, a yearning for a past he did not know, and an uncertain future that rested upon his young shoulders. He walked the sun-dappled paths of Rivendell, a fleeting figure against the timeless backdrop of the ageless elves, a constant reminder of the gift of men, mortality. The day came, upon his 20th birthday, when Elrond deemed him ready to bear the weight of the truth. He summoned the young man to his chambers, a place of quiet wisdom filled with ancient maps and scrolls. There, he looked upon the man he had raised and called him not Estel, but by his true name, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, son of Eredor, heir of Isildur Elendils, son of Gondor. He recounted the long, unbroken line of his ancestry, the tale of the mighty kings of Númenor who had sailed from the wreck of a drowned world, of Elendil the Tall and his sons, Isildur and Anarion, who founded the realms of Arnor and Gondor. And he spoke of the great failure, of Isildur's refusal to destroy the One Ring when he had the chance, a moment of weakness that had allowed the shadow to endure and return. Then Elrond presented him with the heirlooms of his house, symbols of his immense and terrible inheritance. First was the Ring of Barahir, an ancient artifact from the First Age, fashioned in the likeness of two serpents with emerald eyes, one upholding a crown of golden flowers, the other devouring it. It was a ring given to his ancestors by the elf lord Finrod Felagund, a token of eternal friendship between their houses. And then he laid before him the shards of Narsil, the legendary sword of Elendil, the very blade that had been broken beneath the king as he fell in battle against Sauron. Its pieces were still sharp, its light not wholly extinguished. The blade that was broken shall be reforged, Elrond said, when the ring is found again. The revelation was a staggering blow, a weight of history crashing down upon him. He was no longer just Estel, a hopeful youth of Rivendell. He was Aragorn, the last of a line of kings, the bearer of a legacy of both triumph and failure, the fate of the Dunedain, the hope of a reunited kingdom. The responsibility for his ancestors' Senate all now rested upon him. It was a destiny he had not chosen, a burden he felt ill-equipped to carry, but one he knew he could not escape. It was in the midst of this inner turmoil, as he walked in the gardens of Rivendell to contemplate his new reality, that he first saw her. In the soft light of an elven evening, a maiden was walking, her dark hair unbound, her face filled with a light that seemed to come from within. He thought he was dreaming, that he was seeing Luthien Tinuviel, the fabled elven princess of old whose beauty was the stuff of legends. He called out her name, "Tinuviel, Tinuviel," and she turned and smiled. But this was not Luthien. This was Arwen Undomiel, the Evenstar of her people, the daughter of Elrond himself, returned after dwelling for many long years with her mother's kin in the golden wood of Lorien. She was over 2,700 years old, yet she appeared as a young maiden, her beauty a living embodiment of the grace and light of the elves. From that moment, Aragorn's heart was lost to her. He loved her with the fierce and sudden devotion of his kingly line, a love that was both an anchor and a torment. He saw in her the light of the Eldar, the timeless beauty of a world that was fading, and he yearned for it. But their love was a bittersweet one, a path paved with sorrow. For Arwen was an elf, an immortal being bound to the fate of her kind, while he was a mortal man, destined for a short and fleeting life, a brief candle flame against her eternal star. Elrond, who could read the hearts of both men and elves, saw the love that had blossomed between them, and his own heart was filled with a deep sadness, for he had seen this sorrow before. His own brother, Elros, had chosen the gift of men and become the first king of Númenor, and their separation was a wound that had never fully healed. Elrond loved Arwen above all else, and he could not bear the thought of her suffering the fading of a mortal life. He confronted Aragorn not with anger, but with the grim reality of their situation. He told Aragorn that he would not suffer his daughter to marry any less than the king of both Gondor and Arnor, the two great realms that had been sundered for millennia. It was a challenge, a seemingly impossible task, designed to protect his daughter from a choice he believed would bring her only grief. But for Aragorn, it was also a glimmer of hope. It was the spark that ignited the fire in his soul. He would not shy away from his destiny. He would embrace it. He would become the man he was born to be, not for a crown or a kingdom, but for the love of an elven maid. And so, at the age of 20, Aragorn left the sheltered peace of Rivendell and went out into the wild. He cast aside the name of his youth, Estel, and took up his true name and the burdens that came with it. He became a ranger of the north, joining the grim, wandering company of his own people. For nearly 70 years, he toiled in the wilderness, his life a long and weary struggle against the servants of the enemy. He was a solitary figure, clad in worn and weathered leathers, his face etched with the hardships of his travels, his eyes holding the wisdom of one who has seen too much of the world's darkness. The life of a ranger was hard and thankless. They were the secret guardians of Eriador, the lands that had once been the northern kingdom of Arnor. They patrolled its borders, hunting orcs and other fell creatures that crept down from the mountains, ensuring that the simple folk of places like Bree and the Shire could live in peace, utterly unaware of the silent, vigilant protectors who stood between them and the ever-present dangers of the wild. Aragorn learned every path and secret way, the languages of birds and beasts, and became the greatest hunter and tracker of his age. His journeys took him far and wide, into the darkest corners of Middle-earth. Seeking to understand the strength and plans of the enemy, he took on many guises. Under the name Thorongil, the Eagle of the Star, he rode with the horse lords of Rohan, serving King Thengel with valor and wisdom. His counsel was highly sought, and his skill in battle was unmatched. From there he traveled south to the great stone city of Minas Tirith, the last bastion of Gondor. He served its steward, Ecthelion II, a wise ruler who recognized the greatness and the mysterious warrior from the north. Thorongil became a renowned captain, beloved by the people, though his true identity remained a secret. He warned the steward of the growing threat from the corsairs of Umbar, servants of Sauron who plagued the southern coasts. In a daring raid, he led a small fleet against them, burning their ships in their own harbor and slaying their captain, a victory that secured Gondor's coast for many years. Yet his presence in Minas Tirith was not without strife. The steward's son, a young Denethor, was proud and perceptive. He saw a rival in Thorongil, someone who commanded the love of the people and the respect of his father in a way that he, the heir, did not. Denethor sensed that Thorongil was more than he seemed, a man of high lineage, and he did not trust him. After his great victory at Umbar, Aragorn did not return to Minas Tirith for praise. Instead, he left Gondor and journeyed east into the shadows, seeking to counter Sauron's designs wherever he could. He delved into the very heart of the enemy's domain, even venturing to the edges of Mordor and the desolate lands of the east and south, learning much of the Dark Lord's growing power and the fear he inspired. Throughout these long years, he became a close friend and ally of Gandalf the Grey, one of the wise Astari, wizards sent to aid the free peoples. Their paths often crossed in the wild, and they shared knowledge and counsel. Together, they undertook many perilous tasks, the most crucial of which was the long and arduous hunt for the creature Gollum. Gandalf had learned that Gollum had once possessed the One Ring for 500 years, and his knowledge of the ring and its master was a vital piece in the puzzle of Sauron's plans. Their search was long and difficult, leading them through treacherous mountains and the dark eaves of Mirkwood Forest. It was a testament to Aragorn's unmatched skill as a tracker and his unwavering resolve that they finally captured the wretched creature near the dead marshes, a victory that would prove to be of immense importance in the days to come. He delivered Gollum to the elves of Mirkwood for safekeeping, closing one more chapter in his long war against the Shadow. After 30 years of toil and strife, weary of the road and heartsore, Aragorn journeyed to the borders of Lorien, the hidden golden wood of the elves, seeking solace and rest. By the grace of the Lady Galadriel, he was permitted to enter, and there he was reunited with Arwen. She had chosen him, and with that choice, she had chosen a mortal life, forsaking the immortality of her people to be with the man she loved. On the green hill of Saran Amroth, amidst the ever-living elven flowers of Nifredil and Pelennor, they plighted their troth. Aragorn, now a man of 49 years, yet in the prime of his Dúnedain life, gave her the ring of Barahir as a token of his vow. And Arwen, the Evenstar, pledged herself to him, sealing their fates together. Their love was a beacon of light in a world growing ever darker, a promise of a future that was yet to be written. But with that promise came a great sadness, for Arwen had made the same choice as Luthien of old. She had chosen the gift of mortality, and with it, the certainty of death. But the shadow was lengthening, and the time for wandering was coming to an end. The One Ring, the source of Sauron's power, the object of his endless search, had been found. It was now in the possession of a young hobbit named Frodo Baggins, a small creature from a peaceful and unassuming land called the Shire. The fate of the world now rested on the shoulders of this unlikely hero, and Aragorn knew that his own destiny, the challenge laid down by Elrond so long ago, was inextricably linked to the ring's journey. He was instructed by Gandalf to watch for the hobbits, and so he came to the town of Bree, where he waited for them at the Inn of the Prancing Pony. He appeared to them as a mysterious, grim-faced ranger known only as Strider. At first, the hobbits Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin were wary of this weathered and suspicious man. But Gandalf's letter of introduction and Strider's own quiet authority soon won their trust. He knew of their peril, for the Black Riders, the Nazgûl, the Ringwraiths, Sauron's most terrible servants, were already hunting them. He guided them out of Bree and into the perilous wilderness of the Lone Lands. His skills as a ranger their only shield against the pursuing darkness. On the windswept peak of Weathertop, the ancient watchtower of Amon Sul, they were ambushed. The 5 wraiths, led by their terrifying captain, the Witch King of Angmar, closed in on them in the dead of night. Aragorn fought them off with fire and his blade, a lone warrior against 5 dreadful spirits of darkness. But in the assault, the Witch King stabbed Frodo in the shoulder with a Morgul blade, a weapon of pure evil whose shard would work its way to the heart, turning its victim into a wraith under the dominion of Sauron. It was Aragorn who fought them off, his courage and skill with a blade holding the darkness at bay. It was he who used his knowledge of the healing arts, a skill passed down through his kingly line, to tend to Frodo's wound, using the leaves of the athelas plant to slow the poison spread until they could reach the sanctuary of Rivendell. The flight to the ford of Bruinen was a desperate race against time, with the life and soul of the ring-bearer hanging in the balance. In the safety of Rivendell, Frodo was healed by the skill of Elrond. Soon after, the great council of Elrond was held. Elves, dwarves, and men, representatives of all the free peoples, gathered to decide the fate of the ring. It was here that Aragorn's true identity was revealed to all. Boromir of Gondor, son of the ruling steward Denethor, was shocked to learn that the line of kings had not failed, that the grim ranger before him was the heir of Isildur. The shards of Narsil were brought forth, and the elven smiths of Rivendell reforged the blade, making it whole once more. Runes were set upon its blade, telling its lineage, and a new name was given to the sword, Andúril, the Flame of the West. As Aragorn took the hilt of the reforged sword, it was as if the light of his ancient lineage shone forth from him. A king returned from the shadows of the past, his self-doubt beginning to give way to a resolute acceptance of his fate. The council decreed that the ring could not be used. It was a thing of pure evil and would corrupt any who tried to wield it. It must be destroyed. The only way was to cast it back into the fires of Mount Doom, the volcano in the very heart of Mordor where it was forged. A fellowship of 9 was formed to aid Frodo on this impossible quest. 9 companions to set against the 9 ringwraiths. Gandalf would lead them. The company would represent the free peoples, 4 hobbits, an elf, a dwarf, and 2 men. One of those men was Boromir of Gondor. The other was Aragorn, who swore an oath to protect the ring-bearer with his life. The fellowship set out from Rivendell, their path immediately fraught with danger. They attempted to cross the Misty Mountains via the pass of Caradhras, but a cruel, unnatural blizzard, stirred by the will of an enemy, forced them back. Their only alternative was a dark and terrible path. The mines of Moria, the ancient, now dead kingdom of the dwarves. In the black depths of Moria, they faced goblins and a greater terror. In the chamber of Mazarbul, they found the tomb of Balin, a companion of Thorin Oakenshield, and learned of the colony's tragic end. Then, as they fled towards the bridge of Khazad-dûm, they were confronted by a Balrog, a demon of shadow and flame from the Elder Days, a creature of immense power. It was Gandalf who stood against it, knowing that the others were no match for such a foe. He shattered the bridge, sending the Balrog into the abyss, but the demon's whip caught him and dragged him down into the darkness as well. His last words, "Fly, you fools," echoed in their ears as they fled the mines in grief and despair. The loss of Gandalf was a devastating blow. The weight of leadership now fell upon Aragorn's unwilling shoulders. He led the grieving fellowship out of Moria and into the timeless, golden woods of Lorien, where they found a brief respite under the watchful eyes of the Lord Celeborn and the Lady Galadriel. The Lady of the Wood tested their hearts and offered them counsel. She saw the burden Aragorn carried, the love for her granddaughter that warred with his doubt. She gave them gifts to aid them on their journey, elven cloaks, lembas bread, and boats to travel the great river Anduin. To Aragorn, she gave a great green stone set in a silver brooch, the Elessar, or Elfstone, from which his kingly name would one day come. "This is your name," she told him, "the Elfstone, for you are the hope of your people." She also gave him a scabbard for Andúril, enchanted so that any blade drawn from it would not be stained or broken, even in defeat. From Lorien, they traveled down the great river, but the corrupting influence of the ring was at work, preying on the hearts of the company. Boromir, a proud and valiant man who loved his city of Minas Tirith and feared for its safety, was tempted by the ring's promise of power. He saw it as a weapon to be used against Sauron, a way to save his people. At Amon Hen, the Hill of the Eye, he confronted Frodo, trying to take the ring by force. Frodo, terrified, put on the ring and disappeared, resolving to continue his quest alone. In the chaos that followed, the fellowship was ambushed by a large party of Uruk-hai, Saruman's elite orcs, sent to capture the hobbits. Boromir, filled with remorse for his actions, fought like a lion to defend Merry and Pippin, but he was overwhelmed and slain, pierced by many black-feathered arrows. It was a tragic end for a man whose only fault was to love his people too much. Aragorn arrived too late to save him. But he was there to hear Boromir's final confession, and to promise him that he would go to Minas Tirith, and that Gondor would not fall. With the Fellowship shattered and Frodo gone, Aragorn was faced with a critical choice. His heart longed to go to Minas Tirith, to fulfill his promise to Boromir and aid his people in the coming war. But his sworn duty was to the ring-bearer. In the end, he made the hard choice. He let Frodo and Sam go on their own path, trusting that the hobbits' own strength and resilience would see them through. He chose to pursue the orcs who had captured Merry and Pippin, a decision that would lead him into the kingdom of Rohan and directly into the heart of the war. Alongside Legolas the elf and Gimli the dwarf, a friendship forged in the fires of shared hardship, Aragorn began the relentless pursuit. For 3 days and 3 nights, they ran without rest, a pace that no mortal man should have been able to endure. It was a testament to the incredible endurance of the Dunedain, the swiftness of the elf, and the sturdiness of the dwarf. Their chase led them to the borders of the ancient forest of Fangorn, where they met an unexpected and wondrous sight. Gandalf returned from death, clothed in white, his power greatly increased. He was no longer Gandalf the Grey, but Gandalf the White, a shining beacon of hope in the gathering gloom. Gandalf revealed that Merry and Pippin were safe with the Ents, the ancient shepherds of the forest, who were now roused to anger and marching on Saruman's fortress of Isengard. He then led the 3 hunters to Edoras, the golden hall of the kings of Rohan. There, they found King Theoden old and weakened, his mind poisoned by the honeyed, treacherous words of his advisor, Grima Wormtongue, who was secretly a servant of the evil wizard Saruman. Gandalf broke Saruman's hold over the king, casting Wormtongue out and restoring Theoden to his full strength and kingly vigor. With renewed purpose, the Rohirrim, the horse lords of Rohan, prepared for war. Theoden, against Aragorn's counsel to ride out and meet the enemy, decided to lead his people to the ancient fortress of Helm's Deep, a great gorge in the White Mountains. They were vastly outnumbered by Saruman's formidable army of 10,000 Uruk-hai, a monstrous breed of orcs bred for war. The Battle of the Hornburg was a desperate and brutal affair, fought through a long night of rain and terror. Aragorn, fighting with Andúril in hand, was a force to be reckoned with. A king in all but name, he stood on the Deeping Wall, inspiring the weary defenders with his courage and his strength, a true leader of men. As dawn broke and all hope seemed lost, Gandalf returned as he had promised, and with him came Erkenbrand and a great army of Rohirrim. They charged down the slope, their coming like a great wave that crashed upon the ranks of the orcs. At the same time, a forest of strange walking trees, the horns from Fangorn, appeared in the valley, trapping the fleeing Uruk-hai. The tide of the battle turned, and the forces of Saruman were utterly destroyed. It was a hard-won, miraculous victory, a brief but vital respite in the larger war that was still to come. After the Battle of Helm's Deep, Aragorn's path took a darker and more perilous turn. He came into possession of the Palantir of Orthanc, one of the 7 ancient seeing stones that Saruman had used to communicate with the Dark Lord. It was a perilous act, for the stone was a direct link to the malevolent will of Sauron. But Aragorn knew it was a risk he had to take. His own lineage gave him the right and the strength to master the stone. He looked into its depths and wrestled with the Dark Lord for control. revealing himself as the heir of Isildur, holding aloft the reforged sword that had once defeated him. It was a bold, incredibly dangerous move, a direct challenge to the enemy. He sought to distract Sauron from Frodo's true purpose, to draw the fiery eye of the Dark Lord upon himself and away from the land of Mordor. The gamble worked. Sauron, shaken by the appearance of Isildur's heir and the sword, now feared that his enemies possessed the One Ring and would use it against him. This act of defiance set in motion the final stages of his journey to the throne. He knew that he could no longer shy away from his destiny. The armies of Mordor were now moving, their primary target Minas Tirith. Aragorn knew he had to reach the city, but the fastest way was barred. So he made a choice that struck fear into the hearts of his companions. He would take the paths of the dead, a haunted and accursed road that passed under the White Mountains. It was a path that no living man had ever taken and returned. Legolas and Gimli, their loyalty stronger than their fear, refused to let him go alone, as did a company of his own kin, the Dúnedain of the North, who had ridden south to join him. He entered the darkness under the mountain Dwymerberg and came to the Stone of Eric. There he called upon the army of the dead, the spirits of the men of the mountains who had betrayed his ancestor Isildur centuries ago. They had sworn an oath to fight for the king of Gondor, but had broken it and were cursed to remain as wraiths in the shadows until their oath was fulfilled. As the heir of Isildur, Aragorn had the power to command them. He summoned the silent, gray army and promised them their freedom if they would fight for him one last time. He led the ghostly, terrifying army to the port of Pelargir on the river Anduin, where the black-sailed corsairs of Umbar were preparing to sail upriver to the sack of Minas Tirith. The army of the dead, an unstoppable, spectral force, swept over the corsairs, their ghostly forms bringing a paralyzing terror to the hearts of their enemies. The fleet was captured without a living man from Aragorn's company striking a single blow. At the river's edge, Aragorn declared their oath fulfilled and released the dead from their long curse, finally giving them the peace they had been denied for millennia. With the captured ships now manned by his rangers and men from the southern fiefs of Gondor, he sailed up the Anduin, arriving at the Battle of the Pelennor fields at the most desperate hour. Minas Tirith was besieged. The great gate was broken. The armies of Mordor had poured into the city's outer circle. The Lord of the Nazgul, the Witch King of Angmar, a foe that prophecy said no living man could kill, rode upon the field, spreading fear and despair before him. Aragorn's arrival was the turning point. The standard of the kings of Gondor, a white tree beneath 7 stars upon a black field, flew from the mast of his ship. The sight of it filled the hearts of the defenders with renewed, incredulous hope and struck terror into the hearts of their enemies. Aragorn and his companions, the Dúnedain of the North, Legolas, Gimli, and the sons of Elrond, leaped from the ships and charged into the fray, a storm of righteous fury. The battle raged, a maelstrom of steel and fire. Aragorn, wielding Andúril, was a whirlwind of destruction, his blade flashing like a white flame as he carved a path through the enemy ranks. He fought not as a ranger from the north, but as a king returned to claim his own, a living symbol of hope against the overwhelming darkness. In the end, the forces of Mordor were routed. The Witch King was slain, not by the hand of a man, but by the courage of a hobbit, Meriadoc Brandybuck, and a woman, Éowyn of Rohan, the niece of King Theoden, fulfilling the prophecy in an unexpected way. The victory was a great one, but it had come at a terrible cost. The fields before the city were a sea of the dead, and many of its finest defenders had fallen. Though hailed as a king by the people of Minas Tirith, Aragorn did not yet enter his city or claim its throne. He knew that the war was not over. Sauron still sat upon his dark throne in Mordor, and the One Ring was still in the world. Instead, he entered the city as a healer, his hands bringing comfort and relief to the wounded in the houses of healing. He tended to Faramir, Boromir's brother and the new steward, and to Éowyn and Merry, who had been grievously wounded by the black breath of their encounter with the Witch King. His touch, using the healing herb Athelas, had the power to bring them back from the brink of death. The old lore held that the hands of the king are the hands of a healer, and so his actions were a quiet but powerful sign of his rightful claim to the throne. He knew that a final desperate gamble was needed. In council with Gandalf and the other captains of the West, they made a decision that seemed born of madness. They would march on the Black Gate of Mordor itself. They could not hope to win a military victory, but they could challenge Sauron directly, drawing his full attention away from his own land, creating a diversion that might give Frodo the last, desperate chance he needed to reach Mount Doom and destroy the ring. The march from Minas Tirith was a spectacle of grim resolve, a funeral procession for the living. The great battle of the Pelennor fields had been won, the siege of the White City broken. But the victory felt hollow, a temporary reprieve before an inevitable end. For the architect of the darkness, the Dark Lord Sauron, remained untouched in his black fortress, his power undiminished, his fiery eye now turning with focused malice towards the victors. In the high chambers of the Tower of Ithilien, the remaining captains of the West gathered in a council of war that felt more like a conclave of ghosts. The air was thick with the scent of herbs from the houses of healing, and the ever-present, faint stench of death that still clung to the city stones. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a stark contrast to the gloom that weighed upon the hearts of those assembled. Gandalf the White, his face etched with the cares of a world, stood before them. Beside him was Aragorn, no longer the wild ranger strider, but a king in bearing and spirit, his face calm and resolute, though his eyes held the deep shadows of the paths of the dead and the burden of the crown he had not yet claimed. With them were Éomer of Rohan, now a king himself, his youth tempered by the fires of Helm's Deep and the loss of his uncle, Prince Imrahil of Dol Amroth, his swan, knights having bled for the city, and the sons of Elrond, Elrohir and Elladan, their elven faces serene, but their eyes ancient with the knowledge of long defeat. And among them, small but unbowed, were the hobbits, Meriadoc Brandybuck and Peregrine Took, now squires of Rohan and Gondor. Their innocence lost, but their courage forged in battle. Gandalf laid bare their desperate situation. The armies of the West were grievously depleted. Though victorious on the Pelennor, they had suffered immense losses. Sauron, however, had reserves beyond count. A direct assault on Mordor was not just impossible, it was madness. To march against the Black Gate was to march into the jaws of a dragon. Yet, Gandalf argued, it was in this very madness that their only hope lay. He spoke of the nature of their enemy. Sauron, the ultimate tyrant, could not conceive of a foe who would seek to destroy a source of ultimate power rather than wield it for themselves. His entire being was built upon the acquisition and exercise of control. He would assume that the captains of the West, having defeated his armies, now possessed the One Ring, and that their leader, the newly revealed heir of Isildur, would be marching to challenge him for mastery of the world. "We must draw out his armies," Gandalf explained, his voice low but resonant. "We must empty his land, or at least fix his entire attention upon the war he thinks we are waging. We must force his eye to look upon us, and us alone, so that it is blinded to all else." He did not speak openly of Frodo and Sam, for spies could be anywhere, but the meaning was clear. They had to create a diversion so monumental, so utterly convincing, that the two small hobbits, now somewhere deep within the accursed land of Mordor, might gain the sliver of a chance they needed to complete their impossible quest. It was a strategy born of utter desperation, a fool's hope, as Gandalf himself called it. They would sacrifice themselves, the last army of the free peoples, on the anvil of Mordor to buy a few precious moments for the true ring-bearer. A heavy silence followed his words. The assembled lords understood the price. They were being asked to lead their men who had just survived one of the greatest battles of their age, on a final, suicidal charge. It was Éomer who spoke first, his voice raw. "We are weary of war," he said, "but we will not abandon our allies. The Rohirrim will ride with you." Prince Imrahil nodded his assent, his gaze fixed on Aragorn. All eyes turned to the heir of Isildur. This was his test, his first true act of kingship. He rose, and Andúril, the flame of the West, lay sheathed at his side. He did not speak of glory or victory. He spoke of duty, of the debt owed to those who had fallen, and of the slim hope for a new dawn that lay beyond the shadow. He accepted the plan, not with grim resignation, but with a quiet, unwavering authority that settled the hearts of all who heard him. His will became their will. The decision was made. They would march to the Black Gate. The army that assembled was a shadow of the force that had fought before Minas Tirith. A mere 7,000 men, a small host composed of the most valiant and the most desperate. 6,000 foot soldiers from Gondor and 1,000 horsemen from Rohan. They marched north, leaving the newly cleansed city behind them, and the journey itself was a descent into despair. They passed through the haunted woods of Ithilien, a land that had once been the garden of Gondor but was now a place of creeping dread, its beauty tainted by the proximity of Mordor. The air grew thin and acrid, smelling of ash and decay. The sun was a pale, sickly disk in a sky the color of slate. They saw no living thing, save for the black and red flowered plants that grew in that poisoned soil. The morale of the men was brittle. They sang at first, songs of Gondor and the Mark, but their voices soon faltered and died in the oppressive silence. They marched with their heads bowed, their faces grim, knowing they were walking towards their graves. It was Aragorn who held them together. He walked among them, sharing their meager rations, speaking to them not as a distant commander, but as a fellow soldier. He shared stories of the North, of the long vigil of the Dunedain, reminding them that they were part of a struggle that had lasted for ages. His presence was a quiet fire in the cold, a constant reminder of what they were fighting for. Night after night, he would sit with Legolas and Gimli and the hobbits, their small fellowship a microcosm of the alliance they represented. They spoke little of the future, but drew strength from their shared past, from the memory of Gandalf, and from the unwavering loyalty they held for one another. Finally, they came to the desolation of the Morannon, a vast, dead plain of slag and ash that stretched before the Black Gate of Mordor. It was a landscape of pure evil, a place where nothing grew and nothing lived. The ground was pitted and scarred, the air so foul it stung the lungs. In the distance, they saw their destination, the Morannon, the teeth of Mordor. It was not a single gate, but a great wall of rock and iron that stretched across the pass of Cirith Gorgor, flanked by two great towers, the Tower of the Teeth and the Tower of Narcost, their black stones seeming to drink the very light from the sky. The sheer scale of it was crushing, a monument to Sauron's impenetrable power. The army of the West was but a handful of ants before a mountain of granite. They arrayed their small host upon two great slag hills that stood before the gate, the last defensible ground in that dead land. They planted the standard of the White Tree of Gondor and the Green Horse of Rohan, a final, defiant gesture of life in a realm of death. And then they waited, the silence stretching for an eternity, the feeling of the great eye, unseen but palpably present, weighing down upon them, searching their minds, tasting their fear. Then, a movement at the gate. A company of riders emerged, clad in black, bearing a black standard. At their head rode a single figure, a tall and terrible man, upon a great black horse. This was no ringwraith, but something almost as foul. He was a living man, a renegade of the race of Númenor, who had entered Sauron's service long ago and had risen high in his councils. He was the lieutenant of the Tower of Barad-dûr, but he had forgotten his own name. He was known only as the Mouth of Sauron. He halted his steed before the captains and spoke, his voice a sneering, arrogant drawl that carried with it the immense pride and malice of his master. He was Sauron's emissary, and his purpose was psychological warfare. "Is there anyone in this rout with authority to treat with me?" he mocked, his eyes lingering on Aragorn with contempt. Gandalf rode forward as the true spokesman. The Mouth of Sauron sneered and then began his cruel game. He presented the tokens of despair. First, he held up a small, short sword. Pippin and Merry gasped in horror, recognizing it as Samwise Gamgee's blade. Then, he displayed a small cloak of gray Lorien cloth, fastened with an elven brooch. Finally, with a flourish, he revealed the prize, a coat of mithril, silver, the one that Frodo had worn, a kingly gift from Bilbo. "The spy has been found," the emissary proclaimed, his voice dripping with false pity. "And this was his gear. We have him, and he is being taught the error of his ways. He will suffer greatly if any of you live long enough to hear of it." He then laid out Sauron's terms. The armies of the West would surrender unconditionally. They would withdraw beyond the river Anduin, swearing never to take up arms against Sauron again. The lands of Gondor and Rohan would become tributary states, ruled by a governor appointed by Mordorth Mouth of Sauron himself. In exchange for this complete and utter submission, he offered a single, contemptuous boon: the life of their spy. A wave of pure despair washed over the host. The men groaned in anguish. Pippin, unable to bear it, cried out in grief. For a moment, it seemed the emissary had succeeded, that their will to fight had been shattered before the battle had even begun. But he had misjudged his audience. He had underestimated their resolve, and he had underestimated their king. Gandalf's face was like carved stone. He looked the emissary in the eye and said simply, "We did not come to bargain with Sauron the Deceiver." Then Aragorn spurred his horse forward. His face was a mask of cold fury and kingly authority. He did not speak. He simply drew Andúril, and the sword, reforged from the shards of Narsil, blazed with a white light that seemed to cut through the gloom of Mordor. With a single, swift movement, he rode past the Mouth of Sauron, and without a word, took back the tokens of his friends. The emissary, terrified by this silent, commanding presence and the light of the ancient blade, recoiled in fear. He shrieked in rage and terror, turned his horse, and fled back to the safety of the Black Gate. His retreat was the signal. A great horn blast echoed from the towers, and the iron gates of the Morannon groaned open. From within, a tide of darkness poured forth. An army so vast it seemed the earth itself was spewing forth monsters. Tens upon tens of thousands of orcs, their red banners bearing the symbol of the lidless eye, surged forward. Behind them came mountain trolls, bearing great slabs of stone as shields, their roars shaking the very ground. From the east came legions of evil men, the Easterlings and Haradrim, their faces filled with hate. The small army of the west, standing on their two hills, was utterly, hopelessly surrounded, a tiny island in a raging sea of malice. The battle that followed was not a contest of strategy or skill, but a desperate last stand against oblivion. The air became thick with the foul stench of orcs, the clash of steel, the screams of the dying, and the guttural war cries of Sauron's legions. The first wave crashed against the shield wall of Gondor and Rohan, and the line held but only just. Aragorn stood at the forefront, Andúril, a whirlwind of silver light in the encroaching darkness. He fought with a grim fury, his every blow felling an enemy, his presence a bulwark against the tide of despair. He moved like a king of old, his voice rising above the din of battle, calling out encouragement to his men, his courage a fire that spread through the ranks. Beside him fought his friends. Gimli the dwarf was a force of nature, his axe cleaving helmets and shields, his deep voice chanting the grim songs of battle from the halls of Erebor. "Baruch Kazad, Kazad Emenu," he roared, a challenge to the darkness. Legolas, swift and silent, moved with elven grace, his bow singing a song of death, each arrow finding its mark in an orcish throat or a trollish eye. Prince Imrahil and his knights of Dol Amroth fought with the pride of their noble lineage. Éomer and the Rohirrim, though unhorsed, fought with the wild fury of their people. And among the tall warriors, Pippin and Merry fought with a courage that belied their size. They had seen the end of the world on the Pelennor, and they would face it again here for their friends. Pippin, remembering the witch, King's Fall, stayed close to the trolls, hoping to find an ankle to stab. But numbers and sheer brute force began to tell. The line bent and buckled. Men fell, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the enemy. The trolls lumbered forward, smashing gaps in the shield wall, and the orcs poured through. The battle dissolved into a chaotic swirl of individual combats, a desperate struggle for survival on a field of ash and blood. Despair began to creep back into the hearts of the men. They were dying. And for what? The hope that Gandalf had spoken of seemed a distant, fading dream. It was then, as all seemed lost, that a new cry was heard, not from the throats of men or orcs, but from the sky above. Gwaihir, the Windlord, and his brother Landroval, the great eagles of the misty mountains, came soaring out of the west, a sight of wonder and terror. They plummeted into the fray, their talons tearing at the faces of orcs, their great wings beating up a storm. They fell upon the remaining Nazgûl, who were circling the battle on their fell beasts, and the sky became a battlefield of its own. The arrival of the eagles was a sign, a miracle that lifted the hearts of the embattled army of the West. They let out a great shout, a sound of renewed, desperate hope, and fought on with a strength they did not know they possessed. Yet even this was not enough. The tide of orcs was endless. The hills were completely overrun, Aragorn and his captains were driven back to back in a small, desperate ring. Aragorn looked out at the sea of leering faces, at the crushing weight of the darkness, and he knew the end had come. He raised Anduril one last time, his voice a clear clarion call of defiance. For Frodo! And in that very instant, the world changed. A tremor ran through the earth, a deep, powerful shudder that was not the tramp of armies or the crash of battle. The ground beneath their feet heaved. Far to the southeast, the sky was split by a flash of brilliant, searing light, and the cone of Mount Doom, a distant peak on the horizon, erupted in a cataclysmic explosion of fire and ash. A great, shapeless shadow rose from its peak, a form of pure malice reaching out towards them. And then a mighty wind came from the west and blew it away, scattering it into nothingness. A final piercing shriek tore across the heavens, a sound of such ultimate despairing agony that it chilled the very souls of all who heard it. It was the death cry of Sauron, his spirit, unbound from the ring, now banished into the void, to wander as a formless, impotent shadow forever. The effect on his armies was immediate and absolute. The orcs, trolls, and other creatures of darkness, creatures animated solely by the will of their master, were suddenly cut loose. Their minds, which were not their own, were plunged into chaos and terror. Some stood bewildered, dropping their weapons. Others shrieked and turned on one another in a blind, suicidal frenzy. Most simply fled, a panicked, mindless rout, trying to escape the crumbling land of their master. The ground continued to shake violently as the foundations of Sauron's power were unmade. The towers of the Teeth, the great iron gate of the Morannon, cracked and crumbled, collapsing into ruin. On the distant horizon, the mighty tower of Barad-dûr, the fortress of the Dark Lord, shivered and fell, its vast structure imploding into a cloud of dust and fire. The war was over. The shadow had passed. In the aftermath of the cataclysm, on the now quiet battlefield, the survivors stood in stunned silence. Gandalf's gamble, the fool's hope, had paid off. Far away, Frodo had succeeded. The ring was destroyed. Victory had come, not by the sword, but by the courage of a hobbit. The journey back to Minas Tirith was a triumph. The victorious army was hailed as heroes. On the field of Cormallen, in the green and now healing land of Ithilien, a great celebration was held. It was there that the true heroes of the age were honored. The great eagles brought Frodo and Samwise from the slopes of the erupting Mount Doom, and they were healed by Aragorn's own hands. He hailed them as the saviors of Middle-earth, and the entire host knelt before them, a king and his army paying homage to the humble courage of two small hobbits. On the 1st of May, as the world bloomed anew, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, at last came into his own. At the gates of Minas Tirith, before a joyous crowd of all the free peoples, he was crowned. Gandalf, acting as the steward of a world he had helped to save, took the ancient winged crown of Gondor from its ceremonial casket and placed it upon Aragorn's head. He was proclaimed King Elessar Telcontar Elessar, the Elfstone, for the green gem he wore, a gift from Galadriel, and Telcontar, the Quenya form of Strider, the name he had borne in his long years of exile, a name he chose to honor his past and the path that had brought him to this day. He was the 26th King of Arnor, the 35th King of Gondor, and the first High King of the reunited kingdom in over 1,000 years. His first act as king was one of profound symbolism. Guided by a vision from Gandalf, he climbed the slopes of Mount Mindalluin, the mountain that stood behind the city, and there, in a high, hidden place, he found a sapling of the white tree, the line of Nimloth, thought to be long dead. He carefully brought it back and planted it in the court of the fountain, where it soon blossomed, a living symbol of the renewed life of his kingdom and the return of the king. The joy of his coronation was soon made complete. On Midsummer's Day, a great procession came from the north. Elrond of Rivendell arrived, and with him was his daughter, Arwen Undomil, her beauty a star in the daylight. Her long wait was over. Her father's challenge had been met. Aragorn, now the High King of the West, took her hand, and they were wed in the city of Minas Tirith before the assembled free peoples. Theirs was a love story that had defied the boundaries of race and time, a union that sealed the peace of the new age, a testament to the enduring power of hope and devotion. The fourth age of Middle-earth, the age of men, had truly begun. King Elessar's reign was as long and as fruitful as any had dared to hope. He ruled for 122 years, a golden age of peace and prosperity. He ruled with justice, strength, and a deep compassion. His wisdom, honed by his long years of wandering, and his profound understanding of the hearts of all free peoples. He did not forget the allies who had fought beside him. He renewed the ancient oath of Eorel with King Eomer of Rohan. He established strong friendships and trade with the dwarves of the Lonely Mountain and the Iron Hills. And Gimli brought a colony of his people south to marvel at and rebuild the wonders of the glittering caves behind Helm's Deep. To the hobbits, he granted the Shire as a free land under his protection, forbidding any of the big folk from entering it without permission. He rebuilt the northern kingdom of Arnor, making the ancient city of Annúminas by Lake Evandem his northern capital. He was a king who traveled, who walked among his people and understood their struggles. With Arwen as his queen, his reign was a time of healing and renewal. They had a son, Eldarion, who was fair and wise, and several daughters, ensuring that the line of kings would continue, strong and secure. He was a king of all the free peoples, a unifier who healed the deep wounds of a fractured world. But even the greatest of kings are mortal. The blood of Númenor granted Aragorn a long life, but it did not grant him immortality. When he was 210 years old, having lived a life fuller than any 10 men, he felt the approach of old age. He knew his time had come. In the manner of the great kings of Númenor of old, he chose not to wait for his mind and body to wither and fail. He chose to relinquish his life willingly, his final act of kingship. He went to the house of the kings in the silent street of Minas Tirith, the hallowed place where the tombs of his ancestors lay. He said farewell to his son Eldarion, passing to him the winged crown of Gondor and the scepter of Arnor, the symbols of the reunited kingdom. His final farewell was to Arwen, his even-star, the love for whom he had striven for a kingdom. Their parting was filled with a sorrow that touched upon the very nature of their two kindreds. He comforted her, explaining that he was not being taken from her, but was accepting the gift of men, the mortality that was their unique fate. Then he laid himself down upon his long stone bed, and of his own will passed into the deep sleep of his fathers, his face serene and beautiful, even in death. Arwen's heart, however, was shattered. The light of her eyes was quenched. Only now, in the face of his eternal absence, did she feel the full, crushing bitterness of the choice she had made so long ago. She had forsaken the undying lands for her love of him, and now he was gone. The world of men, without him, became gray and cold. She said no farewells, but left the city of men and journeyed alone back to the north, to the now empty woods of Lorien. The golden leaves were falling, for the age of the elves was well and truly over. Galadriel was gone, Celeborn was gone, and the woods were silent. There, Arwen lived out the remainder of her days, a solitary, grieving figure in a world that had moved on. She died of a broken heart on the green hill of Seren Amroth, the very place where she had first plighted her troth to Aragorn, and there her grave would remain, a lonely monument to the last great love story of the Elder Days. The story of Aragorn is, in its entirety, a story of profound and enduring hope. It is the tale of a king who rose from the forgotten shadows of exile to reclaim a lost legacy. It is the story of a man who embraced a destiny he did not seek, not for the allure of power or the promise of glory, but for the love of his people, for the love of an elven maid, and for the unwavering hope of a brighter future. He was the last of the Dunedain, the final chieftain of a fading people, and he became the first of a new line of kings, a bridge between a world of myth and legend and the dawning age of men. His name would be remembered for all time, a symbol of the unyielding strength of the human spirit, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest and most desperate of times, a single flicker of hope can ignite a fire that will illuminate the entire world. And so, his memory lives on, not just in the white stone of his city or the gilded words of the chronicles, but in the hearts of all who cherish freedom and who dare to hope for a better world. The story of Aragorn is, in the end, the story of us all. A story of the endless, timeless struggle between light and shadow, and the quiet, defiant, and ultimately triumphant hope that one day the light will prevail